When you hear the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, do you ever stop to think about whether those words even go together? They're almost always together in some order or other. Sometimes they're inclusion, equity, and diversity. Sometimes they're equity, diversity, and inclusion. Doesn't really matter. Stop and think about what each one of these words means, and then ask yourself this question: can you have all three at the same time? I say no. I say this entire idea is a paradox. And here's why. Let's take a look at diversity. Diversity used to mean that you would have a diversity of outlooks, a diversity of viewpoints, diversity of ideas in one organization, and allowed in one classroom in terms of an academic discussion, because after all, a classroom at pretty much any age is supposed to be where we learn and grow and develop, which we can't really do if we're not challenged, which means we can't really do it if we are always hearing the same idea, or if we're told that some ideas are bad and we must only listen to one idea, which is the good and virtuous idea, and all the other ideas that you might want to bring forward to examine are bad because they're not that one idea. And then for a while, diversity meant having people all look a little different or come from different countries originally at some point, maybe not in the recent past, but the far distant past, because we're America and we're a melting pot. And so diversity was more representative. Let's have some people who more closely represent the different types of people in terms of their background and their culture in our organization, in our classrooms, and our teaching staff, and so on. Presumption being, because they come from different backgrounds, they will bring with them different viewpoints. It just goes together, right? If you come from a different culture in the distant or near past, you're going to bring different ideas. That was the logic anyway, and it sort of seemed to make sense for a little while, like a very little while, until people started to realize that it wasn't that long before most Americans were just Americans, unless you were literally a new immigrant. Just because your ancestors came from another country didn't mean you automatically had different viewpoints or ideas to bring to the table. You might actually look different from other people in the room, but share all the same opinions. And then it just became straight up representation by skin deep attributes like the color of your skin, your sex, biological sex, your gender expression, your sexual orientation. Things of that nature became somehow important, whether or not we knew anything about the person's viewpoints or opinions or skills or anything they brought to the table. And that's where we are now. We're at a place where it's so superficial, we are treating individuals like avatars or stand-ins for an entire race or an entire gender or an entire age or ability. And that just doesn't pass the smell test. I mean, we know that not every biological female thinks the same way. We know not every biological male feels or thinks the same way. We know that not every person who's melanin challenged thinks the same way. And we certainly know that every melanated person, black person, brown person, whatever you want to call people with more melanin than I've got, they don't think the same way. They're not a monolith. People are not monoliths. Now, if you want to talk about culture, subcultures, then you might get into some more differences. But we're not talking about that, are we? No. In fact, we're not really allowed to talk about that. That's considered taboo to discuss subcultures. What do I mean by subculture? Well, we really don't talk about each other anymore as Italian Americans or Irish Americans or even African Americans in the literal sense, because most African Americans don't necessarily know exactly which African country they originated from. And those who do, maybe more recent immigrants or those who have traced their ancestry, will probably tell you that not all people from the continent of Africa have the same culture or viewpoints, for that matter, just because their skin tone might be similar. So we don't really do that. We don't really get into those subcultures. And if we were going to get into subcultures in American culture, that's really taboo, because now you're coming up against things like class and religion and other things. It gets murky and it's complicated, and we don't want to go there, because those would actually be courageous conversations. We might actually find out about some of the good and the bad within each of them that might contribute to some of the problems that we have as a society. But no, 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 no. It's just the one global problem. It's just racism, just race. What is race? Go ask the critical race theorists. Apparently, it's tied up in melanin and power and things like that, but it all comes down to power. Power and privilege, power and privilege. And people who lack melanin apparently have it by default, because the country was founded by people who were melanin challenged, and people who don't have power and privilege because of the color of their skin just don't. Doesn't matter how many years have passed since the Declaration of Independence, or even since 1619. No. Nothing has changed. The power all resides in something called whiteness. So today's version of diversity is what exactly? Because it sounds like now, since whiteness is the bad thing, that's where all power resides, and power and privilege apparently are what's holding everyone who's not white back. That's what whiteness is. We have to decenter whiteness. We have to deconstruct whiteness. We have to dismantle whiteness. By the way, whiteness is also tied up in things like our founding documents, like Western Enlightenment values, like what's contained in the Bill of Rights, like equality under the law. And that's going to bring me to my next point. But let me finish up with diversity first. So now we're down to diversity is anybody not white. Yep, pretty much anybody not white. Now you have diversity. So if you are white, you're not really going to help anybody's diversity quota. And there are quotas. They're there. Yeah. To get more diversity into an organization, a classroom, a teaching staff, etc., it means hiring people who aren't white. We're really down to that level. Because again, it's presumed that all white people think the same and are the same, the degree of oppressive nature and violent nature. Sounds a lot like what the KKK and the white supremacists used to say about black people, doesn't it? Yeah, it's kind of interesting how it's kind of flipped 180 degrees. But anyway, so that's really what diversity is now. The translation of diversity is anybody but white people. So let's move on to equity. Equity. What is equity exactly? Well, equity is equal outcomes. Equity used to be making sure that people truly did have equal opportunity, and we would focus on whether those equal outcome, not equal, but even the ability to pursue an outcome that might be comparable to somebody else was even within your power, within your reach, because there might be artificial things holding you back, like Jim Crow laws or red line laws or things like that. And even within schools, it might have been like, are we tracking people by race? Because they used to do that. Are we putting kids in the slow classes by race because we assume they can't learn? Because they did that in the 60s after they desegregated the schools. Desegregation wasn't such a wonderful panacea. It actually probably turned back the clock on achievement and created an achievement gap, but that's a whole other video for another time. But so at one point, equity was, what do we need to provide to make sure students are at least starting in the same place? They might not end up in the same place, but if we at least give the students what they need to start in the same place, well, then we've really given them equal opportunity, because to assume that everybody arrives at the schoolhouse door with the same opportunities to access the education is probably stretching it. There are going to be people at home with a lot of parental support and people who don't have it, people with books at home, people who don't have books at home. People will have, somebody who's educated within their own home to read to them and help them with their homework. People who don't have that. People who speak English at home, people who don't. So you get my point. Equity at one point was, how do we, keep the bar high for achievement, but just scaffold the people up who don't have the equal access in the first place? There we go. Equity. We've done our level best to pursue equity within the school, because we can't literally go out to people's homes and change stuff, right? And we're not. We're equal under the law in America. So we can't hold someone back, right? Welcome to 2021, where equity is now literally equal outcomes. And equity means we have to change the law alter the law or ignore the law to whatever degree necessary to achieve equal outcomes, whether we've done all this stuff down here or not. And that means that we do things like get rid of advanced schools because not enough Black students are ending up in them. Get rid of AP classes because not enough Black kids are taking them or succeeding at them if they do. Or we just need to promote them into the AP classes and let them fail and then get rid of the AP classes because too many have failed. Whichever order you want to do it in, we're certainly not helping the Black students achieve. We're certainly not helping any other kind of student superficially classified by identity group. We're not helping them by getting rid of the courses because one group of students didn't succeed. So what we're doing now is what Kurt Vonnegut might have talked about in Harrison Bergeron, his short story, Harrison Bergeron. We are putting in place things to hinder power and privilege, which is tied up in whiteness, so that we can achieve equity of outcome. And when you ask people, but doesn't that kind of mean that you're not only not being very diverse, I mean, you're literally saying we don't want people who have a different ability, skill set, or achievement level, or ambition level, whatever, in the school or in the society. We just want everybody to be at kind of the same level of achievement, however that comes about, even if it's a low level of achievement. It doesn't sound very diverse. But you know what it also doesn't sound like, that pursuit of equity? It's not inclusive, is it? Nor is diversity. You see, if diversity now means anybody but white people, because whiteness is bad, and if equity means we have to make sure there aren't too many white people succeeding, or Asians, because, again, anyone not Black, if we have to do that to achieve equity and the new kind of diversity, how inclusive are we really? Sounds pretty exclusive, if you ask me. Sounds like we want all the people except you. But we're going to call it inclusion. We're going to call it inclusion. And I know what the critical race theorists say is, but whiteness is the default position and you will always be on top and they'll always be there and you don't have to worry. Well, guess what? As a parent who didn't herself choose to be white, who has white children, I actually do care. And this notion that my children are always going to have access to opportunities, are always going to be able to, pursue their dreams and so forth without somebody standing in their way is not a given. You're making it abundantly clear it's not a given. You are actively trying to take that away from my children by saying, you'll be fine. We're just going to take this stuff away from you and you work around it. It sounds a whole lot like revenge. It sounds a whole lot like the way we're going to achieve our new version of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is really just equity, with those other things tacked on to make it sound okay, that you're taking away everybody's civil rights to equality under the law, equal access to opportunity, true equal access. Sounds like in your zeal to rewrite the Bill of Rights and remove that little thing about due process and get rid of that little equality under the law bit so that you can right the wrongs of the past by discriminating today, as Kendi would say, Ibram X. Kendi, author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, sounds to me absolutely exclusive, not diverse. And the only thing you're trying to get out of it is equity. But you know what the kind of equity you're going to get? You're going to get results similar to what we got on our national report card yesterday. 22% of graduating seniors proficient in science. Do you know how many are proficient in English and math? Yeah, we're not even to 40%. So congrats. Congrats. You are well on your way to achieving equity of what's the goal? 0%? 0% proficient? Then we'll all be the same level of incompetent. Is that actually what you want, maybe? And when I say you, I mean educators, teachers unions, politicians, people in power, people with the real power and privilege. Because right now I'm not feeling too powerful or privileged. No, not really, no. Because, you see, I want to say what I want to say, and thank goodness it's still legal for me to do so. But I'm likely to be shot down, sent hate mail. I could be doxxed. Bad things could happen to me or my kids because I'm just defending our rights in America to be treated equally under the law. I'm not asking for anyone else to be held back. In fact, quite the opposite. I think there are better ways to scaffold and help kids get access to education. I think there are much better ways to deliver on the promise of public education, which I don't even believe in, by the way, because I think government running education is a conflict of interest, but I still think there are better ways better ways through private means to deliver on public education. Public not being funded by the public, but just available to anyone who needs it or wants it, provided by other people who voluntarily want to do that. Yes, I do believe that could be possible if we ever bothered to pursue it. But we don't, because government will not release its stranglehold on their ability to brainwash us. So next time you hear the words diversity, equity, inclusion, or inclusion, equity, diversity, or equity, diversity, inclusion, or whatever, just ignore the D and the I, because they really don't mean anything. They don't mean anything. If you are not melanated, if you are not trans or gay or non-binary or disabled or just self-hating beyond belief and willing to hand over everything that you've earned and that you deserve because of this overwhelming guilt that you have for things you didn't personally do, because other people who look like you did them in the past. If you don't belong. You're not in this conversation. In fact, cover your mouth. Not for you to say, not for you to say. So just remember, it's paradox. It's another one of their word games. It's not diverse and it's not inclusive. It's just equity. And equity is not a good thing. It's un-American. It has nothing to do with freedom, nothing to do with liberty, and nothing to do with excellence or achievement. By the way, it will all be false. What these people have not wrapped their tiny brains around is that somebody could come along today, literally today, and just give everybody A's. Here, have an A, have an A. Here you go. Does that mean you've achieved anything? Does that mean you know anything? No, it doesn't. Do you think sitting in struggle sessions with your white classmates or your white students or your fellow white teachers is going to move the needle one bit on literacy in this country, on numeracy? No. No thinking person thinks that. And once you get everybody believing this lie, this giant lie, and following this paradox into oblivion, what will you have exactly? What do you think you're going to have? Do you think you're going to have a country that you can now, control? Have the power and privilege over the white people now? What? You really think you're going to have a pluralistic society where everybody gets along? When you treat one entire group of people based on things they cannot choose, they didn't choose, when you treat them like they're bad, like everything bad, power and privilege over others to oppress others. Because implied in all of this is that somehow, if you flip the script and the power and privilege went to people who were not white, they would be so good and decent and sharing and kind, and everyone would have equally. Except we already know that's not true. We already know that if you even try to hold a different opinion from people who believe all of this, they will hunt you down. They will make sure you lose your job. They will make sure people throw dead pigs on your lawn. They will attack your children in public. Verbally for now. For now. Children will attack you. My next video is going to be a little bit about that. But this one was just about diversity, equity, inclusion. What a big fat lie it is. Big paradox. Total BS. They're not remotely, by they, again, I have to keep saying it. The critical race theorist, the equity educator, the diversity educator, the, inclusion educator, the cultural relevance educator, whatever name you want to put around it. Anybody who tells you that race is about power and privilege, whiteness specifically is about power and privilege, but anything other than whiteness is about victimhood and being oppressed and chattel slavery. Anybody who tells you that is lying to you. They want that power and privilege to oppress you. Push back before it's too late. That's the video. Thanks for watching. As always, if you like this content, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting. That's the video.